I'd like to call this council work session to order. If we may, I might just want to make a note to remind all the council people and everyone present that we are on a strict time schedule. So if I interrupt or make a motion or do something to cut you short, I apologize, but we are on a quick time short time frame. Also, if we have the time left over, we will add 10 minutes at the end, or we will have 10 minutes at the end for other questions, and otherwise we will be strictly following this agenda. Thank you. Steve, would you like to explain to us the overview of a review and expense trends?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In front of everybody there should be a handout of the copies of the slides that we'll go through tonight. And I believe there's copies in the back for the public. So I'd like to go through and remind the council on the second slide of the mission statement for the city. It's always good to revisit that anytime you're looking at budgeting, and I think we as an organization don't revisit this enough to know what the goals that were set at the council retreat. Moving into the trends for the city on the expenditures, this slide is an excerpt from the mayor's proposed budget presentation. It shows the proposed budget for 2012 at $31.6 million. The trends for the expenditures you'll see here for the last 5 years. The 5-year average is a little over $24 million for the overall budget, which includes the capital improvements and other miscellaneous special revenue funds, as well as the general operating, which you see on the right, of 12.7 over the last 5 years. In looking at the 5-year trend, you'll see that 2012, the total is up, but that's primarily due to the $6 million of capital improvements that are being planned and proposed for the redevelopment of the old airport site. If you look at the general operating, you'll see that it's been pretty flat. It's even down over the last 5 years, and that is due again to through attrition. There are proposed 5 less positions in 2012 versus the previous years. So you'll see there that the council has addressed some of the revenue cuts by the state, and we can talk about that when we get into the revenue projections. But you'll see there that the general operating is pretty much flat in expenditures for the last 5 years. There may be shifting between different programs, but for the most part it's even down. The revenues, again, this is an excerpt from the mayor's proposed budget, and this is revenues. A large portion of that is the fund balances, again $6 million, as I mentioned. When you look at the overall picture, is the redevelopment of the airport. You'll see the current property taxes and the local government aid are the large portion, as well as other financing sources, which is the intergovernmental transfers that the city collects from the municipal utility, Rice Hospital, and other funds to cover administrative costs. Here's a 5-year trend on page 6 of the revenues. Again, you'll see that the current property taxes are trending upward, and that is, again, contributing to the state. Up until 2012, the property tax levy system, there was a levy limit law, which if the local government aid was reduced, the combination of local government aid and the current property taxes were tied together, and we have slides further on in the presentation to kind of give you an example of the 5-year history on that. The local government aid, these are budgeted numbers. Again, the slide will talk a little bit about that. The notification and the budgeted numbers were somewhat different than what the city actually experienced, and that was due to unallotment, cuts, and reductions there. Again, the other financing sources you'll see are trending upward. That is due to, again, the intergovernmental transfer primarily from the municipal utilities, and that's based on their net worth. So as the utility is increased in value, the city does transfer in to cover some administrative costs there. But if you look along the bottom line, the revenues are pretty flat. The fund balances you'll see are trending downward, and again, that's because the margins are narrowing, and so there is less carryover from year to year, and according to current council policy, you take the excess revenues and factor it into your budgeting process. So, and the next slide is just the percentages. It's kind of give you an idea of what that does percentage-wise, but with that, Mr. Mayor, those are the trends in brief for the expenditures and revenues. Happy to answer any questions or comments.
Are there any questions or comments from the council? Go ahead, Councilman Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the report so far. On the other financing sources, primarily the MUC and Rice, because we've had such a large hit on uncompensated charity care, what is it again that we receive on a transfer payment? Is that $200,000 for the last couple of years we've gotten from Rice?
It's slightly over $200,000 projected for 2012. It's been a little less, up to $200,000. They have experienced a little bit of growth, so it's projected to be a little over $200,000 in 2012.
Okay, thanks.
Any further questions or comments? Councilman Christensen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Steve, again. On page 6 on the fund balances, that's actually surpluses at the end of the year.
Those are actually numbers that were programmed into the budgeting process. If you'll see in 2012, $315,000 was the excess for 2010. It's always a year lagging behind, but yes, those are traditionally what's excess from year to year. But it's always, you have to remember that it's a 2-year lag because of the process.
I understand, but I mean, the term surplus would apply.
It could be interchanged with excess, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Those are non-designated funds. The city does have a fund balance, and the Finance Committee is working on a fund balance policy that addresses certain other areas. So these are really excess that are, again, according to past practice, council policy to factor in and available for funding.
So, and they're 2 years behind, like you say.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Thank you, Steve.
The operating levy, next item on the agenda. Again, this is an excerpt from the mayor's proposed budget. As I mentioned earlier, the notification and budgeted amount for local government aid has been changed by unallotment and state cutbacks. You'll see here that started roughly in 2008, where the state started unallotting and reducing our local government aid. That process was done after levies were set, so it did not allow the city to factor that in or go back and re-levy that or increase your levy to make up for those reductions due to the timing of when those items were done. So in that case, the cities had to go back, and basically what the city has done is shifted capital purchases. It's been a 2-year process, and that's been where the city has kind of looked at because it's been after the process. Now in 2012, is somewhat projected to be makeup for some of those capital purchases, and we'll talk about that in future slides as well. It also, in 2012, the levy limits went off, and so the amount that we were notified of, a little over $4 million, the council did have the authority, since levy limits were no longer on, to increase your property tax levy to whatever level that you felt comfortable with. You'll see there that the property tax levy is projected to be increased by $196,000, which is a small portion of what was the local government aid was reduced. Again, with that, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Are there any questions from the council? Councilman Arman?
Just a question. Steve, thank you. On the bottom of the page here, the difference from actual and the difference from certified base, Could you explain those two for me?
The difference from the actual amount there is, you'll see the 700, it's the combination of the local government aid on allotment reduction and the market value credit reduction. The certified base, the council reduced their amount that they could have levied for property taxes in 2011. And so the difference between the $844,000 and the $716,000 is the amount that the council could have levied. But if you remember, the council did not certify the full amount that they were authorized under the levy limit law.
Thank you.
The page 9 is just kind of a continuation there. It's a trend to show you, again, the comparison of the allotted LGA versus what was actually received in the levy to see where it's leveling off as far as the property tax levy versus the LGA in dollar amounts. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Councilman Heston. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Steve. One of the things that I want to go back to this slide 8, property tax levy of just about $4 million. And we've had some discussion on that in the Finance Committee, but I'm just wondering, now that's one of the things that's within our control, and before we get too far into this, if anybody has any suggestions for reducing that. Hasn't been proposed, but I think this would be a time if anyone thinks that perhaps the levy should be reduced. I think it's fine where it is. It would be my opinion, but just wondering if there's any other thoughts on that. Okay, fine. Thank you. Thank you.
Councilman Christensen?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a comment on that. I'd love to reduce it. However, I think that it also reflects the increase in our taxable property, doesn't it? I mean, as time's goes by, I mean, we're collecting more money because we're increasing the tax base.
Approximately half of that will be generated by new construction costs. And that's one thing that the council has historically done, is at a minimum increased your property tax levy amount by the new construction.
Okay, thank you.
Steve, would you care to expand or expound on what the actual increase of the levy is on the city or for the city?
We did have some comparisons for a single-family home valued at about $114,000, and we don't have the slide in here, but I do have that information along. And the total city tax increase projected payable 2012 will be about $349 total on a $114,000 home.
Thank you.
I don't know if that answered your question, Mr. Mayor.
It did.
Or not. As we have mentioned many times in the past, a residential or a property tax owner has a number. They have the city portion of their property tax, but they also have the Candy Lake County and the Independent School District 347 make up the majority of their property taxes. In the cities is about 20 to 22% of that property tax bill. With that being said, the state on the previous slide did have a reduction in homestead credit. Homestead credit program was changed to what's called now the Homestead Market Value Exclusion Program. Just a brief history on the homestead credit. It was created in 2001, and the primary purpose of it was to help certain valued homeowners have a reduction in their property tax bill. Example would be if a property tax owner had a property tax bill of $800, the state would issue them, for example purposes, a $100 credit. The homeowner would pay the difference of $700. The state would take that $100 reduction credit issued and give it to the taxing jurisdictions. That's the way the program was supposed to work. The program actually worked like this. The first two steps were the same, where the state would issue the credit, property tax payer would pay the difference. but the state fell short of revenues and thus did not forward that on to the taxing jurisdictions. I think they've maybe done it, there's been some articles, I believe, maybe once in the last 10 years or something like that. I don't remember the exact numbers there. But then that would, then as a taxing jurisdiction, it would come up short of revenues. Under the Homestead Market Value Exclusion Program, the state is basically taking those certain valued homes, and I don't know what that level is, but we can certainly find that out and give that information to the council. But the new program will reduce the market value of those homes, basically understanding that that would then leave their property tax bill basically the same as the old program. The difference being the state was not going to issue that revenue to the taxing jurisdictions. All it did was shift those values over to the other aspects of the community of commercial, industrial, and the higher valued homes. The impact of this basically is twofold, and this is information that's been sent out by the League of Minnesota Cities. The first, the state is eliminating roughly $260 million a year of their obligations to the taxing jurisdictions. And the second, it basically still exempts lower valued homes, but they may still see a tax rate increase to generate the same amount of dollars because there's less market value to spread the dollars that are levied against. So that's a brief explanation of where we're at on that.
Mr. Mayor. Yes, certainly. Tim?
Yes, in other words, Steve, as I understand it, been reading about this, and it's bothered me ever since that meeting out at the country club. Outstate Minnesota is going to get hurt because we don't have the commercial tax base to shift those taxes to. So more of our homesteads are going to have to absorb that increase outstate.
Twofolds why outstate Minnesota will basically see a larger impact than the metro is that exact scenario where a lot of communities don't have that base of commercial and industrial value. Also, the homes in the metro area are valued higher, so they didn't qualify for homestead credit anyway. And there was a lot of communities in the metro suburbs that didn't receive any homestead credit because of the value of their homes.
Yeah, so when everybody gets their tax statements for real estate taxes due and payable in 2012, people are going to notice some significant increases.
Twofold. They would see possibly some increases if all levies stayed stagnant and relatively flat. They could still possibly see increases, yes, that's correct. If there is a slight increase by any one or all three of the taxing jurisdictions, that would impact it as well. Yep.
Thank you.
Councilman Christensen?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The number one under the two immediate impacts, Steve, says the state has eliminated more than $260 million a year from reimbursements to local governments. They were already eliminating them. So how much of that money, is this the real total value that they're eliminating, or is it just the amount they didn't send out?
The $260 million is the amount that they had budgeted, and it does not reflect the amount they actually paid. The amount they actually paid was somewhat less than the 260.
Okay, so that number is misleading, because they wouldn't have sent it out anyway. They didn't budget for it, but they weren't going to send out half of it. Am I correct in saying that?
Well, it's misleading in the fact if one would assume that they did pay the full amount. It's not misleading in the regards that they did have that programmed into their budget. Again, when they were dealing with budget shortfalls, that's why they didn't send it out. I mean, they were balancing it after the fact.
Okay, so then by them stating that amount and us absorbing it and saying, gee, my taxes are going to go up, they're not going to go up as much as we think they will?
Well, the state will be able to, on their projections, they've basically eliminated the program. So now if their projections are more accurate than they have been in the past, they'll be able to reallocate that $260 million to another program. That's what this changing of
Okay.
the program did.
Thank you.
Yes, Steve? Are you going to do the additional requests? Thank you, Steve.